The rain drummed against the kitchen window like accusatory fingers, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing inside our home. I slammed the cabinet door shut, the sound echoing through the silence that had become our marriage's soundtrack. From the living room, I could hear Mark's voice, soft, protective, almost tender as he spoke into the phone. "No, Mom, you're absolutely right. She doesn't understand how things work in our family." Our family. The words stung like ice against bare skin. When had I stopped being part of our family and become an outsider looking in? 6 years. 6 years of marriage, and I still felt like I was auditioning for a role I'd never quite land. The role of Mark's wife in Margaret's carefully orchestrated family drama. Every Sunday dinner was a performance where I stumbled over invisible scripts, where my cooking was too bland, my career too demanding, my parenting too permissive. Margaret never said these things directly, of course. She was far too skilled for such crude tactics. Instead, she wielded sighs like weapons and deployed concern like artillery. "Are you sure little Sarah should be in daycare so much? In my day, mother stayed home." Mark would shift uncomfortably, caught between two worlds, and I would feel myself shrinking, becoming smaller with each careful critique. I pressed my palms against the cold granite countertop, grounding myself in its solidity while everything else seemed to shift beneath my feet. Through the doorway, I watched Mark pace, his free hand gesturing as he spoke. His shoulders were relaxed in a way they never were when he talked to me anymore. With his mother, he became someone I barely recognized. The devoted son, the understanding boy who hung on every word of wisdom. The conversation ended with promises to visit more often, to bring Sarah by next weekend, to remember that family comes first. Always family first. When Mark appeared in the doorway, his expression was already defensive, as if he could sense the storm clouds gathering in my silence. "She's just worried about us," he said before I could speak, the words falling between us like a wall. Worried about us or worried about me? He sighed, that particular sigh that had become the punctuation mark of our conversations, the one that said I was being unreasonable again. "Emily, please, not tonight." But it was always not tonight, or not now, or let it go. When would it be the right time to talk about the fact that I felt like a stranger in my own marriage? When would we discuss how his mother's quiet disapproval was slowly eroding whatever foundation we'd built together? I wanted to tell him about the dream I had last night, how I was standing in our wedding photos, but my image kept fading until only empty space remained beside him. I wanted to explain how each family gathering felt like a test I was destined to fail. How his silence in the face of his mother's criticism felt like abandonment. Instead, I turned back to the window, watching the rain paint abstract patterns on the glass. In the reflection, I could see Mark standing behind me, and for a moment, we looked like two people trapped in different storms, unable to reach each other across the distance that had somehow grown between us. That night, as Mark slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when love had become this complicated. When had protecting our marriage started to feel like a battle I was fighting alone? The house settled around us with small creaks and sighs, and I found myself listening to its night sounds, searching for answers in the language of aging wood and shifting foundations. Outside, the storm continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had only just begun. The first crack became a chasm on a Tuesday evening in October, when autumn had painted the world in shades of ending. We sat around Margaret's mahogany dining table, the same table where Mark had eaten countless childhood meals, where family legends were born and retold until they became gospel. "Sarah seems tired lately," Margaret observed, cutting her pot roast with surgical precision. "Are you sure she's getting enough attention at home?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I felt Mark's tension beside me, the way his fork paused midway to his mouth. This was the moment where he could stand with me, where he could gently redirect his mother's concern or acknowledge that Sarah was simply adjusting to kindergarten like any 5-year-old. Instead, he reached for his water glass and said nothing. "She's fine," I said, my voice steady, despite the earthquake beginning in my chest. "The teacher says she's doing wonderfully." "Of course she would say that," Margaret replied, her smile sharp as winter sunlight. "But a mother knows best, doesn't she? A mother who's actually there to see the signs." The implication landed like a physical blow. I worked full-time as a marketing coordinator, a job I loved, a job that helped support our family, a job that Margaret viewed as evidence of my maternal inadequacy. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, filled only by the sounds of chewing and the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Mom," Mark finally said, but his voice carried no real authority, no protective edge. "I work hard for our family." It was something, but it wasn't enough. It was a band-aid on a severed artery, a polite acknowledgement that did nothing to stop the bleeding. The drive home was arctic. Sarah chattered from her car seat about the new puzzle Grandma had bought her, blissfully unaware of the tension crystallizing between her parents. I stared out the passenger window, watching streetlights blur past like fallen stars. "You could have said something," I whispered when Sarah finally fell asleep. "I did say something." "You know what I mean." Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you want me to do, Emily? She is my mother. She raised me. She loves Sarah. Can't you just let it go?" Let it go. The phrase had become his anthem, his solution to every conflict. But some things couldn't be released. They had to be resolved. 2 weeks later, I discovered the bank statements. I'd been looking for our insurance documents when I found the records tucked behind other papers in Mark's desk drawer. Regular transfers to Margaret's account. $500 here, $800 there. Over the past 6 months, nearly $4,000 had quietly disappeared from our savings. $4,000 that should have gone towards Sarah's college fund. $4,000 that could have fixed our leaking roof or replaced the washing machine that had been limping along for 3 years. $4,000 that Mark had sent without a single conversation, without a moment's consideration for our family's priorities. When I confronted him that evening, he looked like a child caught in mischief rather than a husband who had violated our trust. "She needed help with her medical bills," he explained, his voice defensive and small. "I couldn't just let her struggle." "We could have discussed it. We could have made a plan together." "You would have said no." The truth of it hit me like cold water. He was right. I might have questioned the amount, might have suggested alternative solutions, might have prioritized our own daughter's future. In his mind, my voice in our financial decisions had become an obstacle to overcome rather than a partnership to honor. "So, you decided for both of us?" "I decided for my mother." The words hung between us like a verdict. In the hierarchy of his loyalty, I had my answer. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, when I woke up with a fever that felt like fire in my bones and a throat so raw I could barely swallow. Mark had already left for work, and Sarah needed to get to school.
I called in sick and spent the morning in bed, drifting in and out of restless sleep, punctuated by the sound of Sarah playing quietly in her room. By noon, my fever had spiked, and I could barely stand. I called Mark, hoping he could come home early or arrange for someone to watch Sarah. He said, "I can't leave work right now. Can you call my mom?"
The suggestion felt like betrayal, wrapped in practicality. Call Margaret, the woman who questioned every decision I made as a mother, to witness me at my weakest, to give her another opportunity to document my failures. But Sarah needed care, and I needed help. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. Margaret arrived within an hour, armed with soup I wouldn't be able to taste and advice I didn't want to hear. She bustled around the kitchen, reorganizing my cabinets with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how things should be done. "You really should take better care of yourself," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of gentle criticism. "Sarah needs a mother who can be present for her." I was present. Even sick, even fevered, I was more present than my own husband, who had chosen his work obligations over his wife's need for support. But pointing this out would only confirm what Margaret already believed, that I was bitter, unreasonable, impossible to please. When Mark came home that evening, he found his mother efficiently managing our household while I lay uselessly in bed. The gratitude in his eyes as he thanked her felt like a dagger between my ribs. "See," Margaret said, as she gathered her things to leave, "sometimes a family just needs someone who knows how to step in when things get difficult." The implication was clear. I was the weakness in our family structure, the fragile link that required constant reinforcement. Mark's nod of agreement was the final nail in a coffin I hadn't even realized I'd been building. That night, after Margaret had gone and Sarah was asleep, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible. I packed a suitcase while Mark showered, my hands shaking with fever and something deeper, the tremor of a life shifting on its axis. When he emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist and steam still clinging to his shoulders, he found me sitting on the bed with my bag beside me. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice hoarse from sickness and exhaustion. "You're sick. You're not thinking clearly." I've never been thinking more clearly. The words came from somewhere deep and honest, from the part of me that had been drowning slowly for years. "I married you, Mark. Not your mother, but somehow I'm the only one who remembers that." His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, something that might have been fear. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? When was the last time you defended me? When was the last time my voice mattered in a decision that affected our life together? When was the last time you chose me?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence was its own response. I stood up, my legs unsteady but my resolve crystallizing like ice. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while." "Emily, come on, we can work this out." Can we? Because from where I'm standing, there's no we to work with. There's you and your mother, and somewhere in the footnotes, there's me. As I walked toward the door, suitcase in hand, I heard him say my name one more time, but I didn't turn around. Some bridges have to burn before you can build new ones, and I was finally ready to light the match.
My sister's guest room became a sanctuary of brutal honesty. For the first week, I slept 12 hours a day, my body finally releasing the tension I'd been carrying like armor for years. Rachel would bring me coffee in the mornings and wine in the evenings, and we'd sit on her porch, talking about everything except why I was there. On the 8th day, she finally asked the question I'd been dreading. What do you want to happen next? I'd been staring at the maple tree in her backyard, watching its leaves perform their annual sacrifice, brilliant orange and red, beautiful in their dying. I don't know, I whispered. I don't even know if I want to save my marriage anymore. But you want to save yourself. It wasn't a question. Rachel had always been able to see through my carefully constructed facades to the truth beneath. Yes, I wanted to save myself. I wanted to remember who I'd been before I'd become so small, so apologetic for taking up space in my own life. Mark called every day. At first, his messages were defensive. He'd done nothing wrong. I was being unreasonable. His mother was just trying to help. But as the days passed, something in his tone began to shift. The certainty cracked, and through the fissures, I could hear something that sounded almost like doubt. "Sarah misses you," he said on the 10th day. "She keeps asking when you're coming home." The mention of our daughter was like a fish hook in my heart. I missed her with an ache that felt physical, missed reading her bedtime stories and braiding her hair in the mornings. But I also knew that the version of myself I'd become, diminished, bitter, walking on eggshells, wasn't the mother she deserved. "I miss her too," I said, and hung up before he could hear me crying. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was helping Rachel plant bulbs in her garden, tulips and daffodils, that would sleep through winter and emerge transformed in spring, when my phone rang. "Emily." Mark's voice was different, shattered in a way I'd never heard before. "There's been an accident. Sarah's okay, but can you come, please?" I was in the car within minutes, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity compressed into 20 minutes, every possible scenario playing through my mind like a horror movie on repeat. I found them in the emergency room waiting area. Sarah sat in Mark's lap, a small bandage on her forehead, and a popsicle in her hand. She looked tiny and brave, and exactly like the miracle I'd forgotten she was. "Mommy," she called when she saw me, and I gathered her into my arms like a prayer answered. "What happened?" I asked Mark over Sarah's head. His face was pale, aged by hours of fear. "She was at Mom's house. Mom was watching TV, and Sarah went outside to play. She climbed the old oak tree. You know, the one with the broken branch we've been telling Mom to cut down for years. The branch gave way. I felt my breath catch. The tree I'd mentioned was dangerous. The tree Margaret had insisted was fine, that added character to her yard. The tree that could have killed my daughter while her grandmother watched television? If the neighbor hadn't heard her scream." Mark's voice broke. "Emily, she could have been really hurt. She could have—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. In that moment, I saw my husband truly seeing, perhaps for the first time, the cost of his passive peacekeeping. His mother's judgment wasn't harmless opinion. It was the reason our daughter had been in danger while under her care. We took Sarah home together, and after she fell asleep between us in our bed, a small, warm anchor in the storm of our marriage, Mark and I talked until sunrise. "I've been a coward," he said, his voice raw from hours of honest conversation. "I've been so afraid of conflict that I forgot my job isn't to keep everyone happy. It's to protect our family, to protect you." I felt invisible, I told him, like I was disappearing a little more each day. "You were never invisible to me, but I was so focused on managing everyone else's feelings that I stopped fighting for ours." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. We talked about boundaries and loyalty,
about the difference between honoring parents and abandoning spouses. We talked about money and decisions and the thousand small ways we'd lost each other in the maze of family politics. "I want to try again," Mark said, as Dawn painted our bedroom walls with gentle light. "But I need you to know, if you come back, it's going to be different. We're going to be different." "How?" "We're going to be a team again. Really a team. And if that means my mother is uncomfortable sometimes, then she'll have to be uncomfortable." It wasn't a fairy tale resolution. Trust, once fractured, doesn't heal overnight. But it was a beginning, a recognition that our marriage was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth putting first. The conversation with Margaret came 2 weeks later. Mark insisted we do it together, in our home, with clear boundaries and united voices. She arrived expecting tea and sympathy, and instead found two people who had remembered how to stand together. "We need some things to change," Mark began, his voice steady and kind, but uncompromising. "Emily is my wife and Sarah's mother, and she deserves your respect. That means no more comments about her parenting or her career. It means asking before giving advice. It means understanding that we make decisions together as a family." Margaret's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, indignation, something that might have been fear. "I don't understand what I've done wrong," she said, her voice small and bewildered. "You haven't done anything malicious," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my tone. "But impact matters more than intent, and the impact has been painful for all of us." The conversation continued for 2 hours. There were tears and raised voices and moments when I thought we might not find our way through. But slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild the foundation of our family relationships, this time with clear expectations and mutual respect. Margaret didn't change overnight. Years of patterns don't dissolve with a single conversation. But she began to try, in small ways that mattered enormously. She asked before offering parenting advice. She acknowledged my career as valuable. She even apologized, awkwardly but sincerely, for the ways her concern had felt like criticism. 6 months later, I sit in a park watching Sarah play on the swings, while Mark pushes her higher and higher into the blue October sky. The leaves are falling again. Not dying, I realize now, but transforming, making space for new growth, for different seasons. "Higher, Daddy," Sarah shrieks with delight, her laughter carrying on the wind like music. Mark catches my eye and smiles. Really smiles. The way he used to when we were dating and everything felt possible. He reaches for my hand and I let him take it, feeling the calluses from his work and the warmth of his palm against mine. We're not the same people we were a year ago. The crisis stripped away our pretenses and forced us to confront the ways we'd been failing each other. But from that honest recognition came something stronger, a marriage built on conscious choice rather than passive drift. "Thank you," Mark says quietly, his eyes still on Sarah, but his words meant for me. "For what?" "For fighting for us, even when it meant fighting with me." I squeeze his hand and think about the tulips Rachel and I planted, sleeping beneath the earth, gathering strength for spring. Some things have to break before they can grow back stronger. Some distances have to be traveled before you can find your way home. "We fought for us," I correct him. "Together." Above us, Sarah soars through the air, fearless and free, trusting that strong hands will always be there to catch her when she swings back down. And for the first time in years, I believe that trust is justified. In the end, love wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about standing together through it, about choosing each other again and again until the choice becomes as natural as breathing. It was about understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to disappear, refuse to become smaller, refuse to let anyone, even family, diminish the life you're building together. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of forgiveness and hope. We gather our things and head home together, 3 hearts learning to beat in rhythm again, carrying the quiet wisdom that comes from surviving your own story and choosing a better ending.